When it comes to Disney villains, we've covered a lot, but there are still plenty of questions that need answers. We've figured out who the most evil is, we've figured out who the most powerful is, but what about the brains department? Which Disney villains have the Einstein level IQ, and which ones aren't the brightest bulbs on the Christmas tree? I'm Kyle with Wicked Binge, and this is Disney Villains Dumb to Brilliant.
And back, you fools!
For this list, we're going to be ranking based on a couple of factors. Much of this will involve how successful villains were with their plans, and also how they ultimately met their downfall. We'll be discussing whether their failures were due to their intelligence or something else entirely. First up, at the very bottom of the IQ chart, the dumbest Disney villain is Prince John. While he is a heartless ruler, greedily taxing and imprisoning his subjects, he is also not the brightest king. The thing is, with his position and the true ruler being off fighting in the Crusades, John didn't have to be smart about what he did. He didn't need to be tricky or underhanded. He was very upfront with the fact that he hated Robin Hood for all he did and represented. He made it clear he didn't want to be mocked by his own people. And he wasn't subtle about the fact that he wanted Friar Tuck to be hanged in order to send a message to Robin Hood, knowing the fox would try to stop the execution. Protect your heads, because the Queen of Hearts is next with the silver medal of stupid. Though one of the most quick-tempered, she isn't going to win any prizes using her brains. We see during her time on screen that she is easily tricked and pacified most of the time. It takes her some time to realize that the roses are painted red, which one would think would be obvious. She doesn't seem to notice that the game is twisted in her favor, which is why she wins. The Queen is a force to be reckoned with when angry, since no one likes to be sent to the chopping block, but if she's this easy to sway, how much of a threat is she really? All someone really needs to do is start singing the Unbirthday song, and all of a sudden the trial is dismissed. We decided to give the infamous Pete the bronze medal of stupid. Over the years, Pete has gone from being a dastardly businessman to someone seeking to take over the throne to a somewhat neglectful father and pretty much everything in between.
High five, son! Psych!
So it's a little tricky to say just how smart he is. What we can say is that even in his roles where he's more devious and has more thought out plans, he still relies on very incapable sidekicks or uses methods that are outdated and are almost always set up to fail. Pete seems to rely more on the power of money or links himself to someone stronger and more influential to use their name, such as in the Kingdom Hearts games when he teams up with Maleficent, or in the Three Musketeers when he worked for Queen Minnie. We decided to mention Chernabog next. Now, while Chernabog is no doubt a terrifying villain that is one of the most intense depictions of the devil ever made, he just doesn't need brains to do his job. Chernabog isn't shown to really have a rival. He can build up his forces and destroy them at will. When someone or something is that overpowered, they don't really see a lot as worthy of taking them down. Chernabog fits the description of a leveled up boss in a game that no one really knows the cheat code to defeat, but his abilities come from raw power and not from wit. At the end of the day, Chernabog is really just a force of nature. This may be a surprise, but Bill Sykes is next. Sykes was a well-off man, but he came into that success by taking advantage of other people.
People like you get hurt.
Controlling those on the fringes of society that are dependent on whatever they can get really isn't that difficult to pull off. Sykes is a lazy criminal who wants to do the bare minimum. He controls dogs rather than people, doesn't have a luxurious setup for his crimes, and seems to only use his money for his appearance and ego. Though she is a fun villain, we're placing the Mad Madam Mim next. She's sneaky enough when going against against Merlin, but she was quickly defeated. We aren't going to say that this made her an incapable villain, but her cockiness definitely got the better of her, and she was proven to be defeated by Merlin thinking of a loophole to turn into a sickness that would infect her. Since she's gone against Merlin more than a few times, you would think that she would be expecting this sort of thing from him.
Oh, it's not too serious, madam. You should recover in a few weeks.
Next up, we have Oogie Boogie. Much like Chernabog, he didn't really have to be smart in order to display his influence. Oogie does have a bit more of an advantage, making up machines for games of chance and torture, but they are all just copies of things that Oogie likely encountered when alive and aren't really original designs.
Looks like I won the jackpot!
We also see that he's easily tricked by Sally's decoy and is defeated because he couldn't keep track of his own threads. You would think if you were made of a potato sack that you would be smart enough to be careful about de-threading your own skin. Next is Captain Hook. In the original series, Hook is displayed to be a man of high intelligence and charm, but we don't get much of that in the Disney depiction of him. Hook is shown as ill-tempered, violent, and two-faced. His men fear him, but he doesn't accomplish anything he wishes to. And we dock him a lot of points for seeking Peter's hideout in Return to Neverland, when the whole ending of the first movie was him learning about Hangman's Tree from Tinkerbell. Honestly, what a plot hole. Moving on to the underhanded Governor Radcliffe. While an ambitious man who is able to make use of the fear his men feel, he isn't the best leader. Wiggins makes the passing comment that Radcliffe came highly recommended, and we can see why. He definitely knows how to climb the social ladder. He knew how to get positions of control, and he kept an ear open when it came to trade and politics. But he put all of his eggs in one basket when it came to hoping to get some of the gold and jewels he had heard of. And when he didn't find any, he started grasping at straws to find a reason for it, coming to the conclusion that the native tribe was hiding it to keep to themselves.
They have it, and they don't want us to take it from them.
Most reasonable people would see the holes in his arguments, but to someone whose reputation is on the line and who refuses to be embarrassed or admit he's wrong, it was logical. Moving on to the Duke of Weselton. Much like Radcliffe, he knew how to play the game, but unlike Radcliffe, he is not subtle in the least. The only reason why the Duke is able to be deemed as a little smarter than the previous villains is that the Duke has a high standing among his people, is a respected figure in Arendelle due to his long-time trade with the kingdom, and he knows how to latch onto Hans and feed people's fear.
You ought to put an end to this winter.
He was able to sneak his men onto the search party with the secret order to take out Elsa on sight without anyone the wiser, but he was eventually called out for his betrayal. Next up, we have Medusa. Honestly, one of the more vile villains in Disney for preying on a small child. Now, it takes some smarts and patience to know how to train giant predatory reptiles, and Medusa knew how to distance herself from the crime she was committing as much as possible to avoid suspicion. She also knew how to pick out a sidekick that wouldn't fight back with her, believing her when she said she would split the profits.
It's mine. It's all mine.
But Medusa was so focused on her one goal of gaining the Devil's Eye and keeping it for herself, she had no follow-up plan. She didn't have a clear setup for how she'd keep Snoops quiet. She seemed to assume Penny drowning would keep all the evidence clear, and she didn't really explain how she was going to avoid getting unwanted attention once she sold off the Devil's Eye. We're placing the animal rights nightmare Corella DeVille next. We would like to know just how she expected to get away with wearing a Dalmatian patterned coat around town after a bunch of puppies were stolen, with the crime even being covered by the newspaper. She did well enough hiring guys that would keep the crime from being traced back to her, but Corella made the choice of hiring resentful and lazy men that were not willing to put actual effort into anything.
We'll find the little mongrels if it takes till next Christmas. Christmas!
No one plots like Gaston. Now, he was a bit trickier to place. On the one hand, he is clearly not good with reading a room, or books for that matter.
How can you read this? There's no pictures.
He's so used to people admiring him and praising his accomplishments, it never occurred to him that Belle was unable to find him as a suitable husband. But on the other hand, he knew that getting Maurice locked away would either get the town rid of a pest or get Belle to finally cave to accept his marriage proposal. One could say Gaston was playing a game of 3D chess. Well, probably not. But he did end up playing his game strategically and isn't quite as dumb as many people think. Next is the catnapper, Edgar. He didn't have any sidekicks or a big operation. For a great portion of his life, though he had his complaints, he was an honorable guy. He served the lady he worked for and helped care for her home and animals and was nice the whole time he did it. It's important to note that he isn't seen as an evil guy until he is determined to come after the cats in the will.
Sleep well? I mean, eat well.
But in that short amount of time, he finds a way to get the felines out of the way in a manner that wouldn't be traced back to him, and keeping his distance from whatever would happen to them. If Duchess and her kittens never made it back, Edgar would have gotten away with it. But he was also late to realize just how much evidence he had to cover up when it came to what he left behind after his confrontation with the dogs. We have the spider psycho Scroop next. Scroop is a good enough actor to avoid suspicion, which is not easy to do considering he looks beyond threatening almost all of the time. He was the one to call out Silver for being too attached to Jim and knew that Jim would be a threat to their plan.
You have a soft spot for him.
He got Mr. Arrow killed in a way that would cover his tracks, knowing the man was too close to figuring out their plan and setting things up in a way that distrust would be given towards Jim. But he is another villain who doesn't plan ahead very well and is caught up in their own impatience to win, meeting his end when Jim lures him to leap into his fate. Jumping ship to another pirate, we have Jon Silver. A capable captain for a number of years, he was able to get his crew to go along with being cooperative long enough to get the treasure map. Not many can pull off a job like that, especially when we realize how long all of these creatures had been traveling in close quarters. He knew how to distract Jim with tasks such as mopping and doing dishes, exhausting Jim to the point that he wouldn't catch on to things. He was also evenly matched when confronting Jim after the crash, showing both frustration and pride in being outsmarted. A well-known baddie, we landed on this placement for Scar in our spectrum of wits. Scar did put a fair amount of planning into his plot to overthrow Mufasa. He was able to use Simba to get the king into a vulnerable situation and use the fear and confusion Simba felt to send him away.
Run away and never return.
And rallying all of the scavenger hyenas, promising them to be able to finally hunt and eat their fill was a clever tactic. But Scar bit off way more than he could chew. We see when Simba returns that the Pride is little more than a wasteland due to Scar being unable to manage the kingdom. His goals were ultimately short-sighted and he had no real plan for sustaining anything. He only wanted the title of king and the power that came with it. Scar didn't have any foresight and was very impulsive. He was manipulative enough to take the throne for himself, but still too dumb to see that a kingdom under his rule was destined for failure.
You wouldn't kill your old uncle.
Had Simba not come back and fed him to the hyenas probably would have eaten him anyway, given they were already in the process of starving. The power-hungry Jafar is next. Though wielding an impressive amount of magic, Jafar was not able to really utilize his powers. He relied on his ability to hypnotize the Sultan, and we can see when he's trying to marry Jasmine that this trick doesn't always work on the first try. He comes off as suffering from tunnel vision whenever he's close to success, getting attacked by Abu and losing the lamp, losing countless people to the Cave of Wonders before finding Aladdin and being tricked by Aladdin to be turned into a genie. We will grant him some credit credit that he was able to hide his true nature for an unknown amount of time, and was the one to figure out who Aladdin was before anyone else.
You will order the princess to marry me.
Jafar is definitely smart enough to be manipulative, but he tends to put his guard down when he gets cocky. Next is one of the earliest Disney villains, the Evil Queen. We covered before how impressive the Evil Queen's abilities are. She's able to cast complex spells, has tools to help her find out anything she wants to know, and is able to disguise herself beyond recognition. But she focused all of those abilities on killing Snow White.
It's a magic wishing apple.
And all because she was envious. It would have been smarter to use her powers to strengthen her kingdom, but she was short-sighted and impulsive. The villain from Tarzan, Clayton, is next. He wasn't a good actor, but he was able to recruit a lot of men to follow his lead with the promise of payment. He was able to join a research team, disguising himself as protection since he knew he couldn't pull off being a scientist or even sympathetic to the apes he was hunting. He was able to channel his need to find them as a desire for the trip to be a success, so his efforts weren't for nothing, remaining under the radar until he had everyone locked up.
I think this one will be better off stuffed.
But his inability to see Tarzan's warning as genuine and being unable to register the vine tightening around his neck was his downfall. Still, Clayton was a resourceful guy who was able to adapt to the situation at hand and was no dummy. Moving on to Hans, he's seen as a master manipulator and was able to use Anna's affection for him as a way of asserting power over others. He played the role of a caring leader for the citizens of Arendelle and a mourning fiancé to the other leaders.
She was killed by Queen Elsa.
He even managed to find the dungeon set aside should Elsa's powers become too much for anyone to handle. Hans did his research and knew how to gain sympathy and twist others to his will, but he was unsuccessful due to his underestimation of Anna. Still, Hans' manipulation ability was a testament to his wit. We're placing Radigan next. His success is mainly due to the fact that those around him were easy to threaten or just weren't smart enough to come up with their own plans. But Radigan wasn't only charismatic, he was also smart enough to escape Basil's detection for years. But his desire for power and his arrogance about being the smartest left a few strings untied. Next is the Horned King. The Black Cauldron is one of the most overlooked Disney movies, but they had one of the creepiest villains the studio has ever released. He was efficient, able to gain the knowledge that he wanted, and gaining the Black Cauldron. And an army of the undead was something that was unique to his plot, with his men expendable and able to fight longer than simple henchmen.
Destroy all in your path.
Next is one of the most quoted Disney villains, Yzma. Now, she wasn't exactly concerned with making her kingdom more powerful either, but that was because they were already wealthy. Yzma wanted the ability to control and oversee everything, but unlike Scar, who just wanted the title of ruler, Yzma just wanted Kuzco out of the way so she could rule as she pleased.
Take him out of town and finish the job now!
She had already been pulling the strings behind the scenes for a number of years, and it's possible she's the reason we never see Kuzco's parents. After all, what better way to run a kingdom than to raise someone to do as you tell them? She did already admit to pretty much raising Kuzco.
I think he would have turned out better.
We have to throw in DrFacilier next, a shady character who was clearly good with wheeling and dealing, a clear ability to persuade others to go along with his offers. On paper, his plan sounded good. Turn the prince into a frog and use his blood to get someone more weak-willed in power that would give him a life of luxury. But maybe don't place all your bets on that working out. Maybe staking your soul on that was not the best way to go. Next is Maleficent. Placing a curse out of being insulted is a lot of effort, but we have to hand it to Maleficent. She really did well covering her bases. She was able to find Aurora with the use of her raven, was able to get the princess to prick her finger, and kidnap the prince as a further insult.
This is a pleasant surprise.
Moving on to Lady Tremaine. Long before she had gotten a hold of the fairy godmother's wand, Lady Tremaine was an abuser that went far below the radar. She passed Cinderella off as a maid rather than family, so no one questioned her mistreatment. When she did come into possession of magic, she used it to twist the prince's perspective of Anastasia to gain higher status, and used said rank to get rid of Cinderella for good. She was done in since she didn't know all of Cinderella's abilities to overcome her situation. Next up is Judge Claude Frollo. He rose to power due to his merciless tactics and connections higher up. In fact, he probably played the game of politics better than any other Disney villain. He was able to get away with a lot, using people's fear to keep them in line.
How dare you defy me?
He was able to use Quasimodo's need to help in order to find the Court of Miracles, and was nearly successful in killing the Hunchback when he was grieving over Esmeralda. He understood the power of shame as well as fear, and he used these things to rule over others. Frollo knew how to use his position to get what he wanted, but his ignorance and obsession ultimately worked against him. Still, he did have himself something of a long reign, and all of his tactics were well thought out. Moving on, we have the Sea Witch herself, Ursula. Unlike the evil queen, Ursula did choose to use her powers to gain control and strengthen her influence. She was able to use Triton's youngest daughter against him, knowing how he despaired of losing any of his family after the loss of his wife.
Let her go.
Not a chance, Triton. She's mine now.
She was able to plan ahead with using Ariel as leverage, which is not something we often see with animated villains. Really, Ursula knew how to play the game to get what she wanted. She used tactics and strategy and understood the concept of leverage. Next up, we're placing Mother Gothel. What can we say about one of the most toxic and abusive parental figures in all of Disney? We really didn't think anyone could ever come close to Frollo, but she proved us wrong. Now, much like Medusa, she knew how to distance the child she kidnapped from the rest of society. Unlike Medusa, however, she didn't let Rapunzel know she wasn't her daughter.
Don't ever ask to leave this tower again.
It was a way of keeping the young princess in line while Gothel used her healing abilities. Gothel's plan would have worked too had Eugene not taken her out of the tower. She's definitely a character who has a lot of wit given her strong abilities in manipulation, representing a dangerous sort of intelligence that exists in real life and often flies under its victim's radar. This might be a bit of an odd pick, but we're placing King Candy or Turbo next. It takes a lot of energy and coding to take over your own game like Turbo did. He was so successful, no one had any memory of Vanellope being the true ruler of Sugar Rush. The only way he was exposed was when Ralph called him out for Vanellope being on the game's design and Vanellope's glitch exposing the real identity of King Candy. We have to rank him especially high because he's the only character to figure out how to reprogram an entire game so that he could take control of it. He was also smart enough to not draw attention to himself, with nobody else figuring out his true identity for quite some time. He was a madman, but he was definitely one of the smarter villains in the Disney universe. Taking the bronze medal of wits, we're going to place Hades. Now, Hades didn't deserve all the crap he got. We completely sympathize that he did not want to be the one in charge of the dead, and he resented Zeus for the role.
As always, hey, full of dead people. What are you gonna do?
Hades was able to play the long game, playing nice and thinking Hercules was out of his way. He was able to bide his time until it was most likely he would succeed. When his plan was threatened, he was able to figure out what to use against the hero. The one thing he couldn't plan for was Meg dying to protect him, which we find surprising considering Meg had already sacrificed herself for love once. We're handing the silver medal of wits over to Shan Yu. Shan Yu was not only a strong leader for his people, but he was hard to take down. He was able to strategize to stay one step ahead for a good portion of the film.
Go! Tell your emperor to send his strongest armies.
His goal was to reach the Emperor and intimidate the man in person, knowing that simply attacking army after army wouldn't achieve all that he wanted. Shan Yu was a strong villain, but also a brilliant strategist and tactician. We have to give the guy credit for his wit on the battlefield. But finally, we're gonna give the gold medal of wits to the Coachman. Seen in Pinocchio, he was the one running the carnival and luring young boys to indulge in whatever they so desired. First of all, this is a big operation. Not only for the various rides, the kitchen that makes the treats, the endless supply of alcohol and whatever else just goes into the island itself, the Coachman also had an untraceable source of labor once the boys were turned into donkeys. And he didn't even have to do the recruiting himself, having various people that spoke about his idyllic getaway and entrancing all the boys to flock to the area themselves. As far as we know in the film, the Coachman is never caught for his actions. Given the fact this whole nightmarish operation he runs seems incredibly complex, the fact that he also seemed to get away with everything kind of solidifies his position as the brightest Disney villain. But what do you think? Who are the most brilliant villains in all of Disney? Let us know in the comment section, and don't forget to hit that notification bell and binge our Good to Evil playlist, where we break down the morality of the characters in your favorite cartoons, shows, and movies. But most importantly, stay wicked.